Yes, we are. A bunch of hypocrites over here. Just chatting it up. Brian led us
Of which I
through
am the chief.
chief hypocrite. I actually just realized I haven't changed the text on the thing here. So, Brian, why don't you give us an introduction to your message that you gave on Sunday while I get the proper text put up on our stream here.
All right, so we're continuing our study in the Sermon on the Mount, coming into chapter 6 now. And the first section in chapter 6, Jesus addresses hypocrisy. And the word hypocrite in the Greek means actor. So he's addressing people who are acting out something to pretend that they are somebody that they're not really. And he's really ticked off at people who pretend to be religious when really underneath there's a different motive. It's not really a sincere religiosity. There's some other motives. He introduces it. I'll read it in chapter 6, verse 1. He says, "Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." So acts of righteousness, good things. He's going to talk about three different things. He's going to talk about giving. And that was the theme for this last Sunday. Then he's going to talk about praying. And then he's going to talk about fasting. Three things that are common to pretty much every world religion, for sure, Christianity. And giving, specifically to the poor, praying and fasting. And these things, Jesus says, be careful. There's a temptation here, probably for all of us in some way, in some form, at some time. There's a temptation to do these things to impress people rather than out of a sincere desire to help people or to be in relationship with God. So he says, be careful. And so then he talks about this giving to the needy, verse 2. "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they've received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So careful how you give is what he's saying. It can be done with the wrong motives in order to impress people. Back then, they blew the trumpets to call the needy together to give them a gift, an offering. But really, their motivation wasn't to blow the trumpets in order to get the needy to come so that they would hear it. It was so that other people would see who was giving. They were really blowing their own horn. And that's where that expression comes from, is from this passage, to blow your own horn. And that's what they were doing. So they had not the right, not the pure motives. And Jesus saw through that and was not happy with it. So he's warning us to be careful how we do our acts of righteousness. So you too, do you want to jump in with a response that you maybe had, or a thought or a question that came out of the sermon, the passage that we looked at this past Sunday?
Peter, I'm looking up a scripture that I want to include, but I want to make sure I get the reference right though. So I'm gonna dump it on you for now.
Oh, absolutely. I was talking to somebody and they were talking about this idea of holding one another accountable, and is there room for testimony and witness? Because, there is, like you said, that the temptation of blowing our horns. But I think about some of the times that I've been in Rwanda and in Africa, when the offering happens, it's a very public thing. And so is, you get the same sense in the New Testament when we talk about the book of Acts, right? Barnabas, and then a little later, Ananias and Sapphira. It talks about them bringing an offering and no one had need. And it was a public thing. So, their question was, this idea of so how does that work? Right? Like, we're not supposed, on the one hand, scripture says, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. And on the other hand, there's this very public displays of giving. And so, how do we reconcile that? How do we actually, account for that? So.
Okay. Well, one of the things that that I kind of think is that Jesus said to give in secret if we realize that this is an area where we really are tempted, where we really have the wrong motives, because that's the cure for a problem, right? Is to give secretly and then see what happens, see if we still give, or see if it really bugs us that nobody knows, then we know we have a problem. So this whole thing about secrecy is a good response to the problem. But that doesn't mean that we can't give publicly. If the motives are pure, sure, then there's nothing wrong with it. It can be a huge witness to other people. I remember one situation at PRBI. We were at a banquet. This was many years ago. PRBI still had a great debt. And some older couple stood up during the banquet and said, the Lord's impressed on us to give $1,000 right now. Would anybody else care to join in and give $1,000 to help reduce this debt? Quite a few people responded to that. And I think, I don't know what their motives were, but it had a very positive result. And if their motives are pure, then that's a wonderful thing.
And I think that's so true. I think in our day and age, when we talk about money, we always talk about it in very private ways. And I think sometimes that's actually to our detriment, right? The Apostle Paul often said, imitate me. And I get the sense he was opening his life up as an open book and just saying, I'm pursuing Jesus as best I can. I counted everything a loss, but I want you guys to consider that. And I think there is definitely room for accountability, a room for testimony, room for witness and spurring one another on. Didn't, Paul talked to a couple of his churches and said, you guys gave so much, and now it's a challenge for some of the other churches to step up their game too. And I don't think that that's wrong. And I love what you said, Brian, that it's a lot about our heart and our own motive, right? Whether we're actually giving for the right motive, whether we are giving so that somehow it impresses people. And wasn't that the difference between Ananias and Barnabas? Often we forget that those two stories are actually interrelated. That right from the beginning, it talked about Barnabas doing something similar and selling and giving a large sum of money. And it was like, yes. And then Ananias and Sapphira obviously did it with the wrong motives. And I think, especially with the church in the West, we can kind of go too far in kind of like saying, all your, money thing is a private thing. Whereas I think we should be living in community. It should be a testimony. It should be spurring one another on, that we have those sort of things to kind of grow with one another.
I think that the question, and Jesus says it, like, you've got your reward. If that is in your mind and in your heart, if the praise and the recognition of man is what you're seeking after, then it's all you're going to get. And you'll get it, but that's it. And I think perhaps when it comes down to us, because I agree with all that you have said, especially about the fact that we maybe can be maybe a little bit too meek, or maybe have a false humility about being quiet instead of spurring each other on and letting our light shine before men, that they may see our good deeds. And there's truth to that too. And so I think that there's a time when it's okay to be an example, and it's okay to be known for what you've done. Jesus is known for what he did. So, but I think when it comes to assessing ourselves, it's like, what is my heart set on? Is my heart set on the applause? Is that what people will think? Or is it set on, or would I have given the same or done the same, regardless of anybody known? Am I more excited for what's being accomplished by the giving, and for the fact that I have not even come close to giving what God has already given to me? In my mind, that's been one way at least, especially when it comes time to maybe put yourself out as an example to encourage others. It's like, I'm happy to do that. My heart's not set on that, my heart is set on the heavenly reward. And really, what I love about this verse is that, like, maybe I'm starting to confuse the next section. I just want to read it real quick, make sure I have it. Yeah, the Father who sees in secret will reward. So the reward of God, I mean, the good news is that this teaching plays to our desire for reward. We don't have to suppress that. We just have to trade up for, well, I mean, as great as you are, Peter and Brian, you can't compare. Your applause and your approval, it just doesn't even hold a candle to the, God, eternal Father. The fact that he will acknowledge us, he will reward us, that ought to be forefront in our minds. That ought to be what we're seeking. And if it means we have to give in secret, then it should be a joy and a delight. We should be very excited to give secretly in ways that no one else will ever know.
One of the comments after the sermon on Sunday was from someone that said, I don't mind not getting recognition for something good that I did, but I can't stand it if somebody else gets recognition for something good that I did, and I don't get any recognition for it. So can either of you identify with that? How do you respond when you don't get recognized for something, or when somebody else gets patted on the back for something that was your idea or something that you did?
It's hard not to insert yourself in. There are moments where behind the scenes things have needed to get done in certain situations in order to salvage, an event, or in order to salvage a relationship, or in order to salvage something and there's work that goes in behind the scenes and no one ever sees or knows. And sometimes I definitely struggle with, at times, I think as I grow older, it's less and less. It's just part of how life goes. Especially as a parent, that's a really big step into you're not getting, your kids aren't clapping their hands for you every day. Yay, mom and dad, you guys really came through for me. You're used to a servant role a bit more, and so it comes a bit more naturally. But it is, there's lots of times where, I actually just remembered, I was up for, when I graduated high school, I was up for Athlete of the Year and Student of the Year, and I won the Student of the Year, and when I didn't win I won Athlete of the Year, and when I didn't win Student of the Year, I was so bent out of shape. And I look back just on shame at how stupid and petty and foolish I was in those moments, because I just craved, there was just not enough recognition in the world for me. And I look back and I'm just disgusted at how I acted. And but it's a visceral thing, especially if we haven't come into the fullness of the fact that God sees you, he recognizes you. And if that's not, until that's enough, it'll never be enough for men, right?
Peter, you had something there?
Yeah, I was going to say I don't struggle with that at all, and so I really I'm just kidding. Yeah. No, that was exactly what I was going to actually ask you guys. The steps towards something that you had said, Caleb. Steps towards transparency and that idea of getting reward from God. I think this is a really big struggle for almost everyone, right? That idea that somebody else gets the recognition that we thought we should get. I think that's, for me, one of the big tests of whether or not I'm doing things for the glory of God or for my own glory. And so much of it, in our society is, you do you get recognized for you. I could totally echo and relate with what you said, Caleb. Throughout our lives, we want the applause of men.
Here, I gotta go check.
Okay. And so at the end, it really is, as we kind of grow in Christ, what Paul talks about seems to I want more of that. I'm not saying in the same way as Paul says, not that I have arrived, but I want more of that. He sits there and says, we shared it this morning in the book of Philippians. Paul's in jail, and he says that, hey, there's people who are preaching the gospel in spite of me, and there's people who are preaching the gospel because of me. And his conclusion was, and I think that's so just crazy. He says, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. As long as the gospel is preached, as long as the gospel is preached, whether in good motive or in improper motives, as long as the gospel is preached. I'm going to turn this off for a second.
Peter, you're getting some recognition.
No, I'm getting a phone call. That's not recognition.
Not the same.
But yeah, like I said, when I read that, it really kind of makes me wonder for myself. What am I doing this for? Am I doing this for my own glory or for God's glory? And yeah, I think that's a big litmus test for myself.
Yeah, because if we're not really doing it for God's glory, or if we're not giving to really help the needy, because that's our desire, then we're not really giving at all. We're buying. We're trying to buy something. We're trying to buy recognition or whatever, or honor, or that's not giving. That's the opposite of giving.
That was a golden quote, Brian. That was good. You're not giving, you're buying.
Yeah.
I like that. I don't like it.
All right. So any practical examples maybe where we have to be careful? One of the things. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, Peter.
No, I was going to say I really enjoyed what you talked about towards the end about pastors. That expectation of pastors being perfect, or pastors having certain expectations. And I know a comment came in as well around that, and just saying, what is it? Scripture says, that teachers and leaders will be held to higher account. And we can kind of take that too far too, and then all of a sudden have weird expectations for ourselves that we almost have to be perfect. And I know I struggle with this. I was just talking to Caleb this morning about this idea of wanting to be all things to all people, and all of a sudden that I need to kind of keep that in check, because if I don't, it pushes me to do things not because of God has called me, but in order to somehow impress people, that they're yay, Pastor Peter's so awesome, and just like wow, and how easy it is to kind of be sucked into that.
Two quick comments about the pastors thing. One, I don't remember if I actually said it or if I was just thinking it, that at McLaurin I feel that we as pastors have freedom to be who we are. We don't have to act. We don't have to pretend in front of the people to be something that we're not. And I think I just said Peter and myself, and I left Caleb out, and he didn't get the recognition as a pastor that he deserves.
I don't have that sort of. I'm a ministry worker, so totally different realm of pressure and responsibility that doesn't even come close to touching what you guys face. So.
Okay, the other thing was, no, I don't make a distinction there. The other thing was, so I kind of made a pretty strong point on Sunday that we should each look at our own hearts and see if there's any hypocrisy. It's so easy to see the sin in other people's lives and ignore it or not see it or justify it in our own. But should be, like, let's say for us as pastors, if somebody sees an issue in our lives, hypocrisy in our lives, how should people approach us from the congregation or from our family if they see it in us?
I have there's someone in my life who just reminds me without being direct about the fact that you have a responsibility of care as a pastor, and it is like it's to hold the office. It means something. It's not just another job. It's not like it means something. And and I think that I think that that's true. Like I think that it's true, and I think that people should be really upfront, or they should be you should have a relationship. I would strive to have a relationship where someone can say, Caleb, can we step into your office and just have a chat? And where if people see something that they're number one, they're willing to speak, and number one, they know that it'll be regardless if there's disagreement, that at least I'm open to that conversation. I think there's I think one of the biggest issues in Christian families or Christian homes or Christian organizations is just bad communication. People, they're not willing to say what they see. They're not willing to share what they experience because they don't want to step on toes. And if you're a leader, I think you should make it really clear that I am for conversation. Conversation is healthy. So if you see something, I expect that if it's bothering you, that you're going to act, and you're going to say, I would like to have a conversation with. Like, that's just the first thing that comes to my mind, is that it should be expressly established that I am open to this sort of I'm open to your presence in my life, and I see that actually as a good and a healthy thing, even if we have to just clarify some details and it wasn't what you thought, or maybe there is something, but we're willing to have conversations. That's the long answer, or the short answer to a long little rant or ramble there. But
yeah, and I think there's a degree of humility on receiving and giving. When we come and approach someone, I think there should be the grace to give the benefit of the doubt, and also the grace to want the best for the other person. Because I think all of us have probably had criticism or something come to us, while it might be right, while they may have saw something, it has come across in such a way as like, well, you just need to fix yourself, and but rather come alongside of another person and want best for them, yeah, and desire the best for them, and to take those steps to kind of journey with them. And then on the receiving side of it, I think there's a humility, as Caleb would say, and maybe I'll put it into words, that idea of the willingness to be held accountable, and that idea of the willingness to be transparent. Right. Mm-hmm. And I know that anytime when somebody kind of comes to me and says, hey, Peter, I see this in your life, the first thing to do is like, you get defensive and you want to kind of like back up, and, you want to kind of whatever. But it's kind of to fight that and sit there and say, okay, so is that true? Is that true? And, knowing that, knowing that this person has the best my best interest in mind, but even if they don't, God has my best interest, exactly. And I need to kind of grow in this. And then that willingness to be held accountable, and that willingness to be transparent. And I know that in recent times, there's been a number of scandals in certain church leaderships happen, and a lot of it is the lack of willingness to be transparent. And so it's one of those things that I know that as staff, I've talked to you guys about it, and I've said to myself that, you can come to me and ask me any question, and I will do my best to tell, be as transparent as I can be. And that's kind of one of those things that I feel like, as we kind of grow, that no amount of accountability is going to, it's going to work, for lack of a better way of putting it, if you're not willing to be transparent. You're not willing to sit there and say, okay, let me think about what you've said. This is how I see it, and willingness to kind of say, okay, I'm willing to lay that out.
Yeah, I think in my experience, for us as leaders, the most important thing to do when somebody comes to us with a concern, with a criticism, the most important thing that I find to do is to thank them for coming. Genuinely say thank you for having the courage, having the willingness, and I will listen to what you say, and I might agree or not, but I'll listen to what you say, and I definitely will take it into consideration and take it into prayer, take it with me. And because that anything else builds a wall. If I right away, like you say, Peter, get defensive and try and argue the other side or try and make a point for myself, they'll say, okay, he didn't even listen to me. Like right away, this argument, I'm not going to do that again. It builds a wall, and then there won't be the openness there. And I think the openness needs to be there. And what I would say to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that is pretty close to like a non-negotiable for someone in pastoral office. Like I honestly think there's a lot of issues that can be there, but if someone can't approach you about something they see in your life, and if you're defensive and you're going to shut down on that, and that's a consistent pattern, like that's not someone, if I'm directing camp, that's not someone I want on my staff. That's not someone that I want setting an example, because you have to be accessible at a fairly deep level. It's a fundamental spiritual discipline that I think needs to be in place. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I would say to the congregation or to people that are not pastors or not in leadership, sometimes you can have the feeling, this whole phrase, don't touch the Lord's anointed. Okay. That was said in the Old Testament when David, had a sword to put through the heart of Saul. Okay. If you're coming to me with a sword, I'll say to you, don't touch the Lord's anointed. If you want to put into my life. At any other time, that's quoted out of context. You need to come to the Lord's anointed. You need to have the courage to come to us. And the other passage that sometimes gets in the way is, take the beam out of your own eye before you try and address the sliver in somebody else's. And there's a point there. Examine your motives. Examine if you have an issue that you haven't dealt with that's huge. And that could be a hindrance to the other person receiving the criticism that you should be taking to them. So anyway, but that doesn't mean you should first deal with the beam and then go and deal with your brother. So that still says go. So if be open to come to us.
Yeah, if you're in the congregation, like if you have someone who is speaking into your life, or if you have a problem or you perceive a problem, if someone else has if you've talked about things with someone else, and I'm not necessarily meaning talking about the problem with the leader or whatever, but if someone is speaking into your life in the same way that you're about to speak into someone else's life, then you're in a good place to actually probably see things clearly. And that's, I don't think we need to have a perfect view of ourselves, but are we accountable to anyone? Because if we're accountable, then that's what I see as like taking the plank out of your own eye. Like, this person should be accountable, but I'm not accountable to anybody. If I'm accountable and someone's speaking into my life, then it's reasonable to expect that, this leader should be on the same page too. We're on the same playing field here. So yeah.
And of course that just comes back to that humility, right? Like coming to a person. And, that idea of taking the plank out of your own eye has a lot to do with whether or not you sympathize and you care for the other person. It's recognizing our own brokenness in the midst of calling other people's brokenness out. And, that idea of don't touch the Lord's anointed. Well, we also know that, Samuel and something like the prophet Nathan confronted King David. And so, yes, I would agree with you, Brian. If you're bringing a sword, please don't come to my office. But if you're bringing something else, come. I feel like we've lost Brian.
Oh, he's back.
Oh,
sorry, not sure what happened there.
That's all right. Peter was just saying while you were gone, he said, yes, if you're coming to my office, if you have a sword, I don't want to see you, but Caleb's room is the first one on the left.
All right, so one little thing, it made us laugh afterwards, but it's actually kind of serious. I admitted to Tracy that I sometimes leave my Bible lying open to make sure as she sees that I've been reading my Bible, because I know that she likes it. So there's a hypocrite for you, looking for the honor, looking for the recognition of how spiritual he is from his wife.
Yeah. Wow. All right. But it just like it's often actually in the silliest things, right? Like probably in the really weighty matters. Like it's almost in these trivial things that we actually trip up more than not. Hey, like
and when you were talking,
like
and when you're talking about that, it just reminds me of like so often we do these things because we're insecure. That I know when I'm doing these little things, it's like somehow I need a little bit of affirmation, and it's not. I think we can all be insecure. It's somehow I think a more healthy approach to it is to recognize our insecurity, bring it to God, and bring it to others, right? Like, this idea of, I've done, nothing comes to mind right away, but I know I've done a few things in order to kind of get my wife's attention and try to affirm me. Probably a better way is really just approaching her and talking to her and reconnecting in that way. Much more healthy than somehow, almost, and I'll use myself, like use some sort of passive aggressive techniques of like, hey, look at how great I am. You need to take notice of me. And even when it does, I don't know if it, as I think Caleb had said, I don't know if it really fulfills in the way that, approaching it properly. And so, yeah, like, I think there's that humility and being transparent with our own insecurities and that need to bring it into the forefront.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't have any other thoughts or questions right now. Do you guys have anything else?
Don't be a hypocrite. See you next week.
I almost feel like we should break out into a song. I don't want to be a Pharisee.
Yeah. Don't want to be a hypocrite.
Sadducee.
Because they're not hip with it.
Yep. I just want to be a sheep.
It's okay to be a hypocrite if you're in a play, but not on the stage of life.
That's right.
Brian's full of wonderful quotes. Love it. Well,
Thanks for joining us for Living in the Scriptures Live. And this is Life here at